Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. And today we're going to be talking about the human factor behind APT groups. And this webinar is really meant for anyone who is in cybersecurity or who's interested in cybersecurity. The topic itself is not too technical, but it is a good overview or even a reminder for those individuals who's been doing cybersecurity for some time. And this is a interesting topic that I think a lot of you will hopefully will take away some good knowledge or reminders from. So let's begin. So just wanted to quickly go over my background with you. So I'm currently with Capital One's Cyber Threat Intelligence team. And basically what I do is I look at threats against Capital One, and I try to make sure that the external threats are properly contextualized for our basically company's decision makers to make sure that they're making the right decisions when it comes to cybersecurity and how to react, and of course work very closely with all facets of cybersecurity within Capital One's enterprise to make sure that the things are being properly addressed when it comes to cybersecurity. So prior to Capital One, I spent 17 years in the U.S. intelligence community, and of those 17, obviously, and with 12 of the 17 was spent working in its cyber intelligence work. I helped build a program that kind of led to a lot of the cyber collection efforts within U.S. intelligence, and as a total, spent about 14 years doing cyber intelligence work. So in terms of what we're talking about, we wanted to make sure that this is discussed often, but maybe it gets lost as people are really looking at a lot of the technical information. And what we're talking about is the biggest threat against various companies, often called advanced persistent threat, or APTs they're referred to, are made up of people. And a lot of times when we look at cybersecurity, we look at from a defensive point of view, the human errors that lead to breaches and compromises. But sometimes we forget that there are actually people in these groups. And the part of the reason why we are talking about APTs in particular, because these individuals are, or these groups, I should say, are a lot more deliberate in terms of their effort to go after the targets, and also kind of a lot of the activities they do being both sophisticated and very persistent. And this makes us a bigger threat, whereas your run-of-the-mill criminals or individual tends to be, or even hacktivists tends to be somewhat opportunistic. And so I felt that talking about the human element and reminding folks about the human element within APT groups, it is a good reminder. So there are a lot of different definitions when it comes to advanced persistent threats. And this is an academic definition, and I felt like this is the definition that tracks with kind of what we're going to be talking about and how we're going to be talking about today. In the past, a lot of the folks were talking about APT groups as being just the whole sophisticatedness, talking about the fact that they're the groups that use 0 days, and over the years that knowledge gap between lower level, or actually mid-level cyber groups and these advanced persistent groups, typically consisting of nation state or even advanced cyber criminal groups, that gap has narrowed. But what makes these advanced groups or APT groups much more advanced is the fact that their ability to adapt and basically overcome the defenses that they may encounter. The other thing is obviously the persistent factor, which we will talk about later as being really tied to their intent, is that once they start targeting a specific entity, they're not going to give up, or at least they're not going to give up right away, meaning that also that opportunities factor is not applies to these groups. So this is the reason why we want to look at these groups a little bit more closer as we discuss these threat groups. This slide shows real people behind some of the APT groups. And, just wanted to share some of my background in that part of my job with the US government kind of made me go out and interact with a lot of the cyber groups in other parts of the world. And as as I was interacting with these other groups and from other nation states, some of them that we knew to be conducting cyber attacks or cyber, what we call computer network exploitations against US governments or even commercial companies, you realize a lot of these individuals are just like us. They're not much different from even those of us who are doing a lot of the cybersecurity work, whichever organization you're on, because a lot of these individuals, maybe except the criminal groups, but individuals who are working for these nation state groups, they really are doing their job. I mean, this is their job. They go to work in the morning, and then basically their job is to do cyber attacks or cyber exploitation to get at information or requirements that are they're given to them by their big organization. But one of the things that you'll notice even from when you read the details of these indictments is that these groups are actually small offices or small subset of a much larger organization, larger intelligence organizations or military units, basically doing or supporting the bigger part of the requirement for that particular organization. So it is kind of like putting persons the face to the name or individual to the name. Just kind of these don't come out very often, but it's nice to see that they're actually reminder as being these are individuals. So wanted to quickly go over simplified version of basically an intelligence cycle, and particularly when it comes to cyber operations. And what you will notice from this graph is basically there are people from where the cyber operations start from a lot of these groups to the individuals that are actually carrying out the attack, and even the victims that are going after. So you realize the key elements when it comes to cyber is very human driven. But at the same time, if you took a step back and kind of thought about it, this is not that much different from your other collection efforts, the traditional means of intelligence collection, and kind of the realization that, okay, this is happening because there are human beings that want information or a material from basically another human being, and in order to carry out that activity or carry out that task, it basically they're using another group of human beings to conduct these activities. So, and of course, this is a continuous cycle, and you realize that again, this is constantly ongoing. So good to keep in mind that even within these activities, that when it comes to cyber operations, uh, these are happening because there are customers and there are the individuals carrying it out, and the people they're going after or entities going after is also, and in this case, us, staff with individuals and people. So quickly wanted to go over, a typical structure of ATP groups. This is probably not new to a lot of folks, or at least this is, gleaned from, some of the indictments, or what we see from a lot of the, open source research, is that when you look at a lot of the, known advanced persistent threat groups, they are structured just like any other organization within that particular, large organization that APT group belongs to. They're not seen as they're not a, autonomous, this bigger than life groups that are, out there by itself, but typically they kind of belong within a structured or hierarchy group. And for at least for nation state groups, you see that they have a very good division of labor. Whereas if you look at the criminal groups, they are structured kind of like your traditional, organized crime. Their cells, they're cell based, and a lot of that is for, security, operational security. In case one, cell gets, compromised, meaning arrested, the law enforcement, gets them. It doesn't affect the bigger criminal organization, and this is not much different than your real life criminal who actually do physical crime. And even with cyber, at least from reporting and what we've seen, they're not much different how they're divvied up. But again, this graph shows in essence, how these groups are organized and unorganized as people. And so, it's always good to keep in mind that, they're not typically operating on their own. They're doing the bidding within the bigger organization. So good overview as to understand how these groups actually fit into the bigger puzzle. So when we're looking at how these groups are tracked, they're typically tracked with, technical information, malwares, basically infrastructure, TTPs, and even signature. And what's good to keep in mind is that when you're looking at these type of information, this is what's available typically in the public. But, they don't necessarily give you the full picture. But at the same time, when you really look between the lines of what you're actually looking at, is that when you're looking at malware or even signatures, and these groups are differentiated and tracked based on the uniqueness of these technical data. But you have to realize is that these uniqueness are actually, human traits, because when people code and when people do, technical work, regardless of, writing or even conducting activities online, they have habits, and these habits and these uniqueness allows security researchers, and they're a big part of it, to kind of differentiate them amongst a lot of the other groups or other activity, even when they're using some of the commonly available malware and tools. And as they're being tracked, there are occasions when one group may disappear and another group pops up, and then that group somehow gets tied back to the older group because of their other activities and slash their targeting and some of the infrastructure they're using kind of makes them look like this is a successor to the previous group. But what's probably happening is that this is the same group in real life, but what happened was there was personnel change. And so now what the security researchers are seeing is very different. Well, I shouldn't say very different. It is different. It looks like the old group, but now they're being touted as a new group. But what probably is happening in real life is that there was personnel change within that group. So you have you could have new hackers within that group, or you could have new developers because the older ones or ones that were doing the previous activity either moved on or got reassigned or doing something else, because again, a lot of these individuals are doing this as a job. And so when you're looking at technical information, you have to keep in mind that even when you're really looking at the technical information, you're really tracking them through the human habits or human traits within this technical information. So wanted to quickly go into what you're actually seeing. And so when you're looking at a lot of these technical data from your network standpoint, there is that limitation as to what you're actually getting. And this is kind of going into when you are trying to assess what these individuals or these groups may be doing, that it is hard to make that determination as to, or trying to get a full picture of the threat, because what you're getting is very limited. And sometimes you do get the actual identities and who these perpetrators or these actors really may be working for. They usually don't come available until much later in the later down in the line, or a lot of these indictments actually show the actual perpetrators. They're typically 1 or 2 years after the fact, after the actual incidents taking place. So when you're looking at kind of what you can see and what you can get strategically, you have to kind of understand there is a limitation. And in terms of what you're getting in terms of technical data. And so why this is important is that when you're dealing with individuals, you have to understand these individuals have a strong, or they have an intent, and these intent is what determines whether or not they'll be coming after you, and whether or not why they'll be coming after you. So this is part of the process in order for you to be able to see what type of information is really needed, and what the limitations are of the technical information, because we'll go into it later in the slide that technical information, just focusing on technical information, is being reactive, and so we'll go more into that. But what I wanted to touch upon is intent. So what are we getting at? It is important to keep in mind that technical data is not intelligence. Technical data is just data, and when you process the technical data, it becomes information. And there are a lot of good, reading and topics that you could study upon of what truly means intelligence. Uh, but it is good to keep in mind that intelligence is after you process the data to make it information, and once you analyze the information based on how it would affect your organization or where you're trying to defend, then it becomes intelligence. So what am I getting at here is that you need to be able to look at these data, be able to figure out what it really means, and then try to correlate them with other sources to give yourself a full assessment of what this really means. Meaning trying to figure out, you know, uh, what insight can you glean from the information you collected, and you need to figure out what the assessed intent of these group is and what their likely plan is, because one of the things that really would be helpful is that trying to figure out the why behind these activities, and trying to figure out what they would want from your organization. What databases are they trying to go after? What data they really want from your company, and what are they trying to steal? And no understanding that gives you a better insight as cybersecurity practitioners, because once you know their goal, is much easier to figure out what the path these individuals would take. So again, going into the aspects in terms of why it is important to trying to figure out the intent behind these groups, because when they look at your company or entity you're trying to protect, and they could see, at least from the outside, what you have in place and what type of defenses that your company might have in place. But if you are just uh, focusing on the technical information, you are being reactive. And because you're dealing with people, they'll find a way. And again, if you're being reactive, they're already one step ahead. Even if you have a lot of these defenses in place, they'll find a way to overcome it. And it kind of becomes like your IT environment or use a network environment is, just a castle with a moat, and it's a stationary target. Once they do their recon, they'll be able to see, here is how we could overcome those defenses. And so, you have to remember that humans are creative, and will find a way to overcome what they see. So this is why having the proactive defensive measures, like having pen testing, maybe having dedicated red team, at least having that functions to support kind of like what could be done with the neural network that goes beyond just populating IOCs and trying to do detection, and having behavioral monitoring in place are all important aspects of cybersecurity, because again, you're dealing with human beings who are very capable and very smart in what they do. So again, talking about these groups, and we talked about the technical information and what you could do proactively in terms of defending against their activity. But it is also good to keep in mind that the threats from a lot of these APT groups may come from beyond the internet or the network, because again they belong to a large organization, that they would be able to leverage the resources of their large organization. So particularly they belong to an intelligence service or even the military entities. They are able to go out and do the physically, make the physical approach. They may be able to even leverage, individuals within your organization, through social engineering, or even through actual direct approaches. This is where having a insider program, or making sure that you're not just looking at your network from the outside, but you also want to make sure you're looking at network from the inside. Monitoring your user behavior also becomes an important part of cybersecurity consideration for your organization. And again, the threat could be multifaceted. It's not just going to be one versus another. These entities might be coming at you from multiple directions at the same time once they identify your organizations, your group, as a target they want to go after. Because again, the persistence is a big factor, because if they know what they really want, and if you were to be able to determine that you're going to be a target because you have things that these groups want, these are all things that you need to consider when you're looking at the overall threats that are coming from these groups. And again, human factor is very important for all three of these, right? So you have the human factor when it comes to technical, you have the human factor when it goes physical, and you have human factor when it comes to leveraging or social engineering. So always good to keep in mind that it is not just through the internet you're going to be seeing these threats coming from. So just wanted to quickly go over the key takeaways. Again, this is repeated multiple times through the presentation, but good to keep in mind that the human element when it comes to cyber attacks, what it really means, when you realize that human beings are behind these attacks. They're not going to be just systematic. They're not just going to be repeating what you've seen out in the open, or has been reported by cybersecurity vendors. And also at the same time, you want to make sure that one of the things that you do is to figure out why they may be doing these activities, or why they would want to do these cyber attacks against the organizations that you're protecting, because that is very important to make sure that you have proper security measures in place, because like we covered, they're human beings and they will find a way to overcome your defenses. And so as all cybersecurity practitioners know, that it is impossible to prevent a compromise. And I think that is given this day and age, because again, you're dealing with human errors on your side, because humans will always click on spear phishing emails. They'll browse websites they're not supposed to browse. And so that initial compromise is probably going to happen regardless of where you work or how good of a security measure, or security awareness training you have. It is the fact that you have to be one step ahead, understanding that those things will eventually happen, that that you need to be a step ahead of other human beings, because they bank on the fact that there will always be someone that enables them to get that foot in the door, and your job is to make sure that you expect that, and you're one step ahead of what they could do once they're in your network for the first time, or even they'll keep doing it if you're coming after you. But you always want to be proactive and trying to limit their activity, but really think from their point of view what they could be doing against your network or your systems, because they're just like us in terms of they're smart, they're well educated, and they know what they're doing. And so you really have to make that concerted effort to be proactive. And one of the part of being proactive when it comes to security is the understanding that yes, these are human beings, and they will be just like you and I, and being able to figure out the tough problems. And again, they're just doing what they do for a living, at least for a lot of them, to be able to support the requirements of their customers. And like as we in cybersecurity community, we all have customers to report to, and our job is to defend the network. And of course, this will be a continual process. But one of the things that's not going to change is, technology will change, how we do business may change. But one thing that will never change is the fact that it will always be done by human beings against other human beings. So that's it for me. Thank you for listening, and I hope this was helpful. And hope you could take away a couple of things from this webinar. And thank you again.